The story of the American Mafia has always been a reflection of power, ambition, and the darker side of the American dream. American Godfathers. The Five Families Season 1 captures this turbulent saga with cinematic precision, chronicling how a network of immigrant outlaws built one of the most powerful criminal empires in modern history, and how their empire eventually crumbled under its own contradictions. Set against the backdrop of 20th-century America, the series explores the rise and fall of the legendary five families, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, whose grip on New York City reshaped crime, politics, and culture for decades. The origins of this empire lie in the harsh realities of immigration and survival. In the early 1900s, thousands of Italian immigrants arrived in New York seeking a better life. Many found themselves confined to overcrowded tenements and exploited by corrupt landlords, employers, and local officials. In this climate of desperation and exclusion, small-time Sicilian gangs, known as Cosh, emerged as protectors and enforcers within their own communities. They provided services the law could not or would not: protection, justice, and economic opportunity. What began as neighborhood protection rackets soon evolved into organized systems of power and profit, mirroring the ruthless efficiency of American capitalism. The documentary vividly portrays how Prohibition 1920-1933 transformed these street gangs into powerful criminal syndicates. With alcohol suddenly illegal, bootlegging became the mafia's gold rush. Figures such as Charles, Lucky, Luciano, Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese saw opportunity in chaos. They imported liquor, bribed police officers, and established supply chains that rivaled legitimate corporations. The profits were astronomical, and with wealth came ambition. By the late 1920s, New York's underworld was consumed by violent turf wars as rival factions fought for control. Luciano, portrayed in the series as both visionary and villain, recognized the futility of endless conflict. After surviving the brutal Castellamarese War, he proposed a radical restructuring of organized crime. In 1931, he created the Commission, a governing body designed to manage disputes and divide territories among five major mafia families. This new system eliminated the outdated notion of a single boss of bosses and replaced it with a boardroom model of shared power. The five families, Bonanno, Colombo, then Profaci, Gambino, then Mangano, Genovese, and Lucchese, became the pillars of what Luciano called La Cosa Nostra, our thing. It was the birth of modern organized crime in America. Through dramatized reenactments and expert commentary, American Godfathers shows how these families blended brutality with business acumen. They diversified their operations, moving from bootlegging to gambling, labor racketeering, construction, and later, narcotics. Their influence seeped into every corner of New York life. Longshoremen's unions, trucking companies, even city contracts, all were under mafia influence. The series underscores this chilling duality. Mobsters like Carlo Gambino appeared as dignified patriarchs in public, yet ruled through fear and murder behind closed doors. Central to the mafia's endurance was the code of omertà, a vow of silence and loyalty that forbade cooperation with law enforcement. The documentary explores how this code, inherited from Sicilian traditions, created both unity and paranoia. Betrayal was punished by death, and loyalty was rewarded with protection and wealth. But as the series reveals, omertà also became the mafia's Achilles heel. It trapped men in a cycle of violence and secrecy that could not survive the modern age of surveillance and wiretaps. The post-war years marked the height of the mafia's power, and the beginning of its exposure. As America entered the 1950s, organized crime had become a silent partner in industries across the nation. The Kefauver hearings of 1950-51, broadcast on live television, gave Americans their first glimpse of the mafia's hidden empire. Stoic mobsters refused to answer questions, invoking the Fifth Amendment, and in doing so, confirmed what many had long suspected: organized crime was not a myth, it was a shadow government. A defining moment came in 1957 with the infamous Appalachian meeting in upstate New York. More than 60 mafia leaders from across the country gathered to discuss business, only to be discovered by state troopers. News of the raid made national headlines and embarrassed the FBI, which had long denied the existence of a nationwide syndicate. The series reconstructs this event with palpable tension, portraying it as the beginning of the end. The mafia could no longer operate in the shadows, the federal government was now fully awake. In the 1960s, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy declared open war on organized crime. The FBI intensified its pursuit, using wiretaps, undercover agents, and informants to penetrate the mafia's inner circles. The first major crack appeared when mobster Joe Valachi, a soldier in the Genovese family, turned informant in 1963. His televised testimony exposed the structure and rituals of La Cosa Nostra to the American public. For the first time, the Mafia's secret world had a voice, and that voice shattered the illusion of invincibility. The series moves into the 1970s and 1980s with gripping detail, showing how internal greed and law enforcement innovation accelerated the Mafia's decline. The introduction of the RICO Act, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, allowed prosecutors to target entire networks rather than individual crimes. Under RICO, the five families faced their most devastating legal blow, the commission case of 1985, spearheaded by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani. The trial resulted in the conviction of several top bosses, effectively dismantling the Mafia's leadership structure. Yet, as American Godfathers makes clear, the Mafia's downfall was as much cultural as it was legal. The same America that condemned organized crime also glamorized it. Hollywood films like The Godfather 1972 and Goodfellas 1990 romanticized the mob's code of loyalty and honor, transforming murderers into mythic figures. The documentary cleverly contrasts these cinematic depictions with archival footage of real victims, union workers, small business owners, and families destroyed by Mafia violence. It forces viewers to confront an uncomfortable truth: the Mafia's allure lies in its reflection of our own societal obsessions with power, control, and success at any cost. By the 1990s, the once mighty five families had splintered into weakened factions. The old code of omertà eroded as more members turned informant to save themselves. Drug trafficking, once forbidden by traditional bosses, fueled chaos and violence. The new generation of mobsters lacked the discipline and restraint of their predecessors, preferring quick money over long-term influence. Federal surveillance, undercover operations, and electronic eavesdropping made secrecy impossible. The golden age of the Mafia had ended, not with a bang, but with quiet arrests and courtroom confessions. Still, the legacy of the five families endures in American memory. American Godfathers ends not with triumph or tragedy, but with reflection. The Mafia's rise mirrors the evolution of the nation itself, from immigrant struggle to industrial might, from corruption to corporate dominance. These men, for all their crimes, were products of an America that rewarded ambition and punished weakness. They were outlaws who built their own version of the American dream, a dream that ultimately consumed them. The golden age of the Mafia, as portrayed in the series, was not simply an era of organized crime, it was a mirror held up to a society obsessed with success, loyalty, and power. It reminds us that beneath the mythology of honor and family lies a brutal truth: empires built on blood will always end in betrayal. Through its haunting narration, vivid imagery, and meticulous research, American Godfathers, The Five Families Season 1 transforms history into a moral drama, one where the line between villain and visionary is as thin as the blade of a stiletto. The Mafia's rise to power in America stands as one of the most complex and controversial chapters in 20th century history, a story of ambition, loyalty, and the dark side of the American dream. American Godfathers, The Five Families Season 1 explores this saga with cinematic realism, tracing how a network of Italian immigrants built a criminal empire that would shape New York City's social and political landscape for decades. The series blends dramatization, historical footage, and expert commentary to reveal how the Mafia evolved from neighborhood gangs into a disciplined organization that rivaled corporate America in structure and influence. The roots of this empire were planted in the early 1900s, when thousands of impoverished Italian immigrants poured into New York City. Facing prejudice, poverty, and systemic exclusion, they created their own underground networks for protection and survival. In this crucible of hardship, La Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing, was born. Initially a system of mutual aid within tight-knit communities, it soon turned into a means of power and profit. Petty extortion rackets grew into lucrative enterprises as gang leaders imposed their own codes of conduct and justice, often filling the vacuum left by corrupt or indifferent authorities. The turning point came during Prohibition 1920-1933, when the U.S. government outlawed alcohol. The Mafia seized the opportunity, transforming illegal liquor trafficking into an empire. Figures like Charles, Lucky, Luciano, Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese saw bootlegging not just as crime, but as business. Through bribery, smuggling, and intimidation, they built massive networks that supplied speakeasies across New York. The profits were staggering, enough to buy influence in unions, local politics, and even the police. But power bred conflict, By the late 1920s, violent gang wars raged across the city as rival factions fought for dominance. The bloodshed reached its peak during the infamous Castellamarese War between Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Out of this chaos emerged Lucky Luciano, whose cunning and pragmatism changed the Mafia forever. In 1931, Luciano orchestrated the murders of both Masseria and Maranzano, ending the war and ushering in a new era of order. Luciano's genius lay in his vision of the Mafia as a business rather than a family feud. He abolished the title of Capo di Tutti Capi, boss of bosses, and created the Commission, a governing council designed to resolve disputes and manage territories among the city's 5 dominant families: Bonanno, Colombo, then Profassi, Gambino, then Mangano, Genovese, and Lucchese. This corporate model marked the true beginning of the Mafia's golden age. Each family controlled a sector of the city, running everything from gambling and construction to labor racketeering and extortion. Violence became a tool of last resort, profit was the new motive. The series brings this transformation to life through powerful reenactments and rare archival footage. It portrays men, like Carlo Gambino and Vito Genovese, not just as criminals but as symbols of ambition and contradiction, devoted to family and faith yet ruthless in pursuit of control. Their code of omertà, silence and loyalty, enforced discipline within the ranks, creating an organization that operated in near invisibility for decades. By the 1940s and 1950s, the Mafia had woven itself into the fabric of American life. It controlled labor unions, infiltrated legitimate businesses, and even influenced elections. For many Italian Americans, it represented both pride and shame, a reminder of how immigrants could rise from nothing, but at a terrible moral cost. As American Godfathers illustrates, the 5 families were more than gangsters, they were reflections of America's own paradox, a nation that celebrated success, even when it was built on sin. Part 2. Crime, Controversy, and the Fall of the Families. If Part 1 of American Godfathers is about creation and power, Part 2 is about exposure and collapse. As the Mafia's influence peaked in the mid-20th century, cracks began to form within its foundation. The same secrecy and loyalty that had ensured its survival also became the source of its destruction. Season 1 explores this downfall with gripping intensity, charting how law enforcement breakthroughs, internal betrayal, and changing times brought the 5 families to their knees. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Mafia's unraveling. Televised Senate investigations, such as the Kefauver hearings, publicly exposed organized crime for the first time. Viewers across America watched as defiant mobsters refused to testify, hiding behind the Fifth Amendment. Yet the most pivotal moment came in 1957 with the Appalachian meeting, when police stumbled upon a national summit of Mafia bosses in upstate New York. Over 60 mob leaders were arrested, confirming the existence of a nationwide criminal syndicate, something the FBI had long denied. The event shattered the Mafia's invisibility and forced law enforcement to take it seriously. The following decades saw the federal government wage an all-out war on organized crime. Under Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the FBI expanded surveillance, tapped phones, and placed undercover agents deep inside Mafia circles. One of the first major cracks appeared when Joe Valachi, a soldier in the Genovese family, became an informant in 1963. His televised testimony was explosive, revealing the Mafia's rituals, structure, and even its name, La Cosa Nostra. It was the beginning of the end for the Code of Silence. As American Godfathers recounts, the 1970s and 1980s brought a new kind of warfare, legal rather than physical. The introduction of the RICO Act, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, gave prosecutors the power to target entire criminal enterprises rather than just individuals. This legislation struck at the heart of Mafia organization. The landmark Commission case of 1985, led by U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani, indicted the heads of all 5 families. The trial effectively dismantled the Mafia's top leadership and marked the collapse of an empire that had once seemed invincible. But while the Mafia's power waned, its myth grew stronger. Hollywood, fascinated by the contrast between brutality and loyalty, immortalized the mob in films such as The Godfather, 1972, and Goodfellas, 1990. These movies humanized the mobsters, turning real-life killers into cultural icons. The series cleverly juxtaposes this romanticized image with harsh realities, murders, broken families, and ruined lives. Through interviews with historians and former law enforcement officials, it challenges the idea of the honorable gangster, revealing how the myth of the Mafia obscures its true cost. By the 1990s, The five families were shadows of their former selves. Informants like Sammy, the Bull, Gravano and others exposed internal operations, leading to mass arrests. Younger generations abandoned the old codes, embracing drugs, greed, and violence. The disciplined structure that once defined the Mafia dissolved into chaos. The FBI's technological advances, wiretaps, hidden cameras, and digital tracking, made secrecy impossible. The documentary's closing scenes capture this decline with somber reflection, the fall of an empire built not by kings, but by criminals who believed themselves untouchable. Still, the fascination endures. The Mafia's story remains embedded in American culture because it mirrors the country's own contradictions: ambition versus morality, loyalty versus greed, family versus self-interest. As American Godfathers, the five families powerfully suggests, the Mafia's golden age was both a triumph of organization and a tragedy of humanity. Its rise was fueled by the same drive for success that defines America, its fall, by the same corruption and excess that have undone many great powers. In the end, the five families were undone not just by the law, but by their own illusion of control. The series concludes with an evocative reminder: no empire, legal or criminal, can defy time and truth forever. The golden age of the Mafia may be over, but its legacy lingers as both a cautionary tale and a dark reflection of the nation that made it possible.